In 1979, Don Coscarelli, working with amateurs and funded locally in an entirely do-it-yourself piecemeal fashion, serving as director, editor, and cameraman, filming on weekends, somehow created the mind-bending, dreamlike cult classic Phantasm, introducing the world to the dark and malevolent entity known as the Tall Man and his uniquely crafted and mysterious mythology. On an estimated budget of $300,000, the film went on to gross over $11 million at the box office. Because of such numbers, and likely due to the success of The Beastmaster, arguably Coscarelli's most well-known and received work. In 1988, Universal Studios took an interest, desiring to create a horror series, and gave Coscarelli a budget of $3 million. The lowest budget of any of the Universal films in the 80s, but enough for someone like Coscarelli to make a masterpiece, if given the right situation and working conditions. The studio controlled much of the creative decision-making and direction of the film, not allowing any disambiguity, as well as forcing Coscarelli to choose replacing either Reggie Bannister or Michael Baldwin with a professional working actor. Because of these changes, we will never know or see what Coscarelli truly envisioned, but what we have been given is arguably one of the best Phantasm movies ever made, if not the best, and existed as my clear favorite for decades. I will likely get mass hate from true Phantasm diehards on that statement. There are many reasons they are mad, and their points are truly great. Replacing Mike is one of the biggest complaints levied, and we will definitely get into that. The plot is fairly weak when compared to the original, as this movie is somewhat a remake of the original and really doesn't give us much more on the mythology of the Tall Man. Complaints aside, this film is full of memorable characters, memorable battles, tons of over-the-top gore, a grandiose and over-the-top plot and direction, as well as Angus Scrimm, and a truly epic and legendary performance as the Tall Man. These features make this film a force to be reckoned with within the genre of campy action horror. A brief synopsis is needed before we continue. Following the epic plot set up in the original film, the Tall Man, a dark and malevolent unstoppable entity, is harvesting the bodies of the living and the dead to crush down in size and ship off to the Red Planet, growing his ever larger army of undead dwarves. Mike, who is now 19, is freshly released from a mental institution, rallies friend Reggie, and together they wage war against overwhelming odds and the strange and unique armies of the Tall Man, all the while traveling in style, trying to keep their heads on their shoulders, and just maybe getting lucky enough to get laid along the way. Phantasm 2 is one of the greatest camp horror science fiction stories to ever hit the cinema. From the opening segment to the end of the film, the atmosphere, dialogue, character interaction, mystery, and grandiose design is done geniusly based on the style and budget. It becomes cheesy as all these movies do, and in my opinion, the studio really messed up in many ways. Some of the sillier things, like the opening segment being narrated by a love interest, could have been left entirely out. Some lines are a bit too silly and delivered badly. Luckily, the worst parts are short and quickly move to something better, or something that actually moves the plot along, or more accurately, moves the story along, as the plot is fairly static when compared to the first film. That said, you should likely take this review with a grain of salt, as I love this movie. I love the plot, I love the road element, I love Reggie Bannister, and to the disdain of many Phantasm diehards, I love James LeGros' interpretation of Mike. Most of all, I love the mythology presented, and Angus Scrimm's performance as the Tall Man. All of which we will get into in a greater detail. Before we do, please hit that like and subscribe so you don't miss out on any future movie reviews or narrations. And without any further ado, here's the top 13 features of Phantasm 2. At 13, we have the Hemi-Cuda. The black muscle car sported by Reggie Bannister is great. It looks amazing and really sets the atmosphere as it races past what hints at being an abandoned American countryside. The Cuda fits well into the road aspect of the movie and hints at the violent and hate-filled nature of our protagonists. It's also just a badass car, and I assume that is why it was truly included. You couldn't have them rocking Reggie's ice cream truck from the first film. After the Tall Man crashes the Hemi-Cuda in a semi-disappointing car battle, Reggie is trapped. With Mike's aid, he narrowly misses the Hemi-Cuda exploding. At 12, we have the Morticians. They have upped the ante on the old-style caretaker and introduced well-dressed, mind-controlled morticians who stalk the mausoleum and work tirelessly for the Tall Man's agenda. They appear to be super strong and quite intent and set on their directives. They do serve as great antagonists, but in the end mostly serve as cannon fodder for our heroes in the spheres. At 11, we have the Gravers. New to the film, these beasts are truly awesome, especially for an 80s styled romp. We never actually see what hides beneath the dark gas masks. An undead figure, a gaunt and mind-controlled human with what seems to be super strength. We will never know. Their purpose and ultimate goal is to dig up graves for the Tall Man, tirelessly dredging through the earth to fill the coffers of the Tall Man's dwarven armies. At 10, we have the Back Monster. Whilst exploring an abandoned mausoleum, Reggie and Mike find what they believe to be Liz, although it is some monstrous creation of the Tall Man's. I find this to be one of the better Tall Man monsters. As compared to the hand monster in the first film, this one is truly creepy and looks amazing. At 9, we have Mike Pearson. Please don't kill me, Phantasm fans, hear me out. Mike is a great protagonist, and James LeGros is very talented and an accomplished actor. He was not only chosen over a young Brad Pitt for the role, he went on to star and define himself amidst a great array of talent in later films. He shared vast amounts of screen time in Drugstore Cowboy opposite Matt Dillon and was amazing. His chops are a bit iffy at times during Phantasm 2 compared to roles in his later career, but he portrays what he is meant to portray. Michael Pearson, a child raised smart and hard, as defined in the original. At 13, Mike was a badass, easily the best fighter and the most heroic element of the first film. This is him, filled with the knowledge that 7 years of dreams and planning have given him, via an unexplained and as of yet unexplored psychic connection to the Tall Man. He is released from a mental asylum, and the first thing he does is go to work on his grand plan of eliminating the Tall Man. Mike is a hate-filled, revenge and honor-based heroic protagonist. He knows the Tall Man is ending the world, and his sole existence and purpose for 7 years has been planning an end to the Tall Man. Now he is going to enact his plans, even if they are as simple as, arm yourself to the teeth and go get him. That, and find and get with Liz. James LeGros does a really good job, and it makes sense the actor was changed. Actors are always changed from a child to an adult. Usually due to the timing of filming, the actors' ages do not line up with the roles. But here the fans have a great argument that the original Mike, Michael Baldwin, was the right age and the right person for the role. It would have been much more consistent. But Coscarelli needed the budget and had to cut someone. Cutting Reggie would not have made sense and would not have allowed Reggie to come into his own, which he well does and goes on to lead the rest of the films in the series as arguably the main character of the franchise. To me, the sacrifice was more to the overall editing style and lots of ambiguation, as well as adding in a love interest, rather than changing Mike, which based on the choices given and the performance of LeGros was a good move. I'd recommend James LeGros' later performances to anyone that enjoys his acting. He has definitely improved with time and is a commanding and powerful performer, regardless of the genre. Give him a Google search and go down the LeGros rabbit hole. At 8, we have the spheres. The spheres come full circle in this movie. Instead of one, there is 3, and amongst them there is a golden sphere with multiple abilities. It is almost ridiculous how powerful the gold ball is. When it arms itself with lasers and blasts a rat, it seems truly unstoppable. If capable of laser blasts, it should always use this weapon and end everything immediately, but that involves more thinking than a camp film needs. And what we have, when not given too much thought, is simply amazing. A golden ball that is virtually unstoppable. Even solid metal doors cannot hinder this Sentinel's destructive path of violence and gore. The gore comes full circle when the gold Sentinel drills clean through a mortician, blasting him about the room, and only ending its violent rampage when fully lodged in his face. At 7, we have the plot. The plot would go higher as it's great. It's just that it's the same as the first movie. It's not so great in that it's simply a higher staked, higher priced, more violent, more coherent remake of Part 1. That said, the plot is amazing. The Tall Man is harvesting the corpses of the American small town, building his army of dwarven slaves. Mike Pearson, fresh out of the crazy house, joins with Reggie and the two take to the road to destroy the Tall Man. What more is needed? That is the setup for a great movie. We already have a great plot in the first film, and now we take that plot to the road with a quad-barreled shotgun, and it works very well, as the two travel the desolate countryside and slowly close in on the Tall Man. At 6, we have the dwarves. The dwarves are great. These highly original little bastards are truly creepy. If you understand the mythology behind them, you can see how they not only become much scarier, but their existence really drives the plot. They exist as the army of the Tall Man. He possesses many weapons, all of which are extremely dangerous. But in these earlier iterations of the films, it is these dwarves that constitute the real threat to the world. The spheres and cravers and zombies and whatever else the Tall Man can create are not created en masse. The Tall Man travels from town to town digging up and harvesting the corpses of the dead, while killing and harvesting the bodies of the living as well. They are then placed in these buckets where they are shrunk down to miniature size and shipped off to the Red Planet, perhaps Mars. We are never told or explained what this planet is. Here they grow in number, awaiting the day the tall man will unleash them upon the world to completely conquer and harvest everything. So when you encounter one of these dwarves, it was once human. In the case of Liz, her grandma comes for her the night after she was taken, indicating the process can be done insanely fast. The dwarves really complement the campy nature of the film, as well as serving as the perfect fodder for the quad-barreled shotgun. At number 5, we have the ending. After a long final set of action scenes, the heroes break into the tall man's portal room. Here they are intercepted and thrust into the Red Planet. Upon escaping, Mike nails the tall man with a spear to the skull. Liz stabs him with the embalming needle and Reggie turns on the acid-filled fluid. I like that Reggie is the one to take the tall man out, turning Liz's backstab into a life-ending move. It's gory, over the top, set up well and executed perfectly. And amongst all the ways they kill this bastard throughout the decades, this is probably my favorite. As they flee the mausoleum, Reggie torches it. Alchemy, Reggie's love interest, arrives in a hearse to pick them up, and they ride away, triumphant over impossible odds. When Reggie tries to hit on Alchemy, she removes her hair from her skull, showing she is a minion of the tall man. When the hearse comes to a stop, Reggie is seen wounded and dropping, possibly dead. The hearse then speeds away. Mike turns to Liz and, in homage to the original ending, they are grabbed from behind with a well-executed jump scare, immediately ending the film. At number 4, we have the beginning. This is one of the best beginnings in horror movie cinema. If Liz's narration would have been cut, it would have been perfect. The movie begins with Liz talking, then the movie really begins as the end of the first movie plays out. It's simply brilliant and was a very unique move at the time. Mike goes upstairs, is taken by the tall man as per the ending of Phantasm. The new footage immediately begins. Reggie hears the racket, and instantly Reggie begins to fall into his own. He battles a dwarf and crushes it with a shotgun, preps his house for explosion, escapes a horde of dwarves, shimmies his way upstairs through the laundry chute, evades the tall man, takes another dwarf out via baseball bat, grabs Mike, evades more dwarves, and chucks them both out the window. In an epic shot, the house explodes as the two narrowly escape. The tall man turns to the fire in one of the best acted scenes of all time. Somehow Angus Scrimm managed to stand completely unmoved, as an actual explosion raged forth behind him. This scene is perhaps the all-time character-defining moment for the tall man, and one of a plethora of genius-level character-defining moments for the entity contained within this film. It is perhaps ironic that the definition of great acting in this example is being entirely unmoved and monotone while simply watching and slowly putting the prepared casket away. The campy violence and comedic nature of the film is great. You get a flamethrower and a sawed-off shotgun as the main protagonist's main arsenal. But behind that, they have everything. Drills, chainsaws, grenades. They go shopping in a huge hardware store. And the scene is terribly cheesy. It works. It explains everything, shows the creation of the legendary sawed-off shotgun and the benevolent nature of our heroes. From here, the two tear a path across what is slowly turning into a wasteland, tracking down the tall man for the inevitable battle, all the while blasting holes through dwarves, burning strange monsters to ash, and avoiding the twisted traps the tall man leaves for them, in an attempt to find and eliminate the timeless entity. The campy and comedic nature is perhaps borrowed from Evil Dead before it, and it has become a staple of the horror genre, action. But it should be remembered and considered that action was a very new concept at the time, and the over-the-top ash-based heroes we have rampaging through modern Hollywood would not exist if not for films such as this. It was a unique and amazing concept when considering the entirety of horror history to turn this into a campy action film, and there are a great many comedic lines delivered with great timing and effect. At number 2, we have Reggie. I am not sure, but Reggie, I believe, is simply playing an over-the-top, over-characterized version of himself, and this character he plays to near perfection. This is the film in which Reggie comes into his own, and from this point on, Reggie becomes not only a main character, but in the later films he leads as arguably the main character of the franchise. Reggie exemplifies the camp nature of the films perfectly. An ice cream man who has lost his family and gone vigilante. Reggie wields the famous quad-barreled shotgun, which he creates in this movie and uses quite well. Utilizing the spray of a 4-barreled sawed-off, Reggie becomes a force to be reckoned with. He is armed to the teeth with smaller weapons, chainsaws and drills. Reggie has become a rigid and capable thorn in the side of the tall man's plans. As he develops throughout the film, he is pitted against greater and greater odds. eventually fighting a graver one-on-one in a well-filmed, albeit cheesy camp romp that lives on as one of the great Phantasm battles. He then blows 4 dwarves to atoms with one shot of his 4-barrel. He even delivers the final blow to the tall man, having put acid into the reanimation juice and turning the pump on when Liz stabs the tall man with it. At times, it can feel as if he is still yet to fully become Reggie. I would argue that he is slightly better in Part 3, not due to the plot or script, but due to his delivery and understanding of the character. Both had been allowed to develop and age. Without Reggie, the film would stall and stale. Mike would be alone with no one to talk to or develop with. And the later films would most probably not exist at all without the fan favorite Reggie Bannister. He is a solid lead that fulfills his role as a campy and somewhat silly action hero perfectly. As an honorable mention, we have the soundtrack. The soundtrack is amazing, written by Fred Myrow. The soundtrack, while sounding better than it does in the first film, does not sound that much better. At number 1, we have the great Angus Scrimm as the tall man. No other actor defines a role so clearly as Angus, to the point that when pictures of Scrimm are seen, people usually think tall man, not Lawrence Rory Guy, Grammy-winning liner writer. Scrimm is one of, if not the most iconic-looking horror figures in existence. Armed with a small suit and a variety of camera tricks, Scrimm, who is about 6'4", manages to appear menacingly tall. His face, hair, and voice are exceptionally well done and fit the role with an absolute brilliance. The lines he gets are oftentimes iconic and grandiose in nature, and whereas later horror film antagonists usually devolve into a campy, silly, unbelievable pile of crap, this is simply not so with the tall man, who embodies the grandiose design of Phantasm with every over-the-top line.
You think that when you die, you go to heaven. You come to us.
Further fleshing out the unending tyrant that is the tall man. More history is given on this entity in future entries, but at this point what we know is, he is a being with access to a host of supernatural abilities, including resurrection and a seeming immortality. His goals appear to be amassing a huge army for purposes not yet explained, but seemingly for conquering, as he does not appear to be a benevolent defensive entity. The tall man's iconic look was used to create the entity Slender Man. We can trace the first appearance of Slender Man to a picture in a Something Awful contest post, in which the tall man's face was replaced with Slender Man's face, and the figure was put behind some children, supposedly giving life to the modern tulpa known as Slender Man. If you find Slender Man's tall, erect stance and demeanor fearful and menacing, you have Angus Scrimm to thank. He was the original tall man, the Hat Man, the tulpa that embraces Kronos and Saturn, the Grim Reaper and Satan, dark and mysterious, ever plotting and unending, with a need to conquer and control everyone and everything. These are all embodied and played to perfection as the ominous and wicked entity breathes life into every Phantasm film. And we have one man to thank for this, Angus Scrimm, who plays the tall man with an almost unbelievable perfection. The only complaint I would have is that he simply doesn't have enough lines or screen time. As you can tell, I really like this film, and have at times argued that it is the best Phantasm movie, and I do believe in many aspects it is. But as I aged and the films aged, I find myself enjoying Part 3 and Part 4 much more, despite their obvious shortcomings. I am unsure of where this film actually rests within the mythos. It is definitely one of the stronger entries, perhaps due to the funding, action, and the forward direction of the plot. It fails in the fun aspects of Part 3, the ominous and dreamlike perfections of the original in Part 4, but in the campy nature and development of Reggie Bannister's character, the introduction to what would become the norm of beginnings and endings lining up, and the development of the tall man's creatures, the introduction or rather presentation of the Gravers as some type of unhuman beast, the more menacing-looking dwarves than the previous film, and the grandiose, almost ridiculous lines given to Angus Scrimm. It truly shines in unique ways when compared to the other films. In many ways, what we have is a remake of the first film, all the way to the Red Planet scenes, and like Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2, the later film is far better when viewed in the realm of action, budget, and fun. This may well detract the fans of the series who may prefer a dreamy, confusing arc of mystery, but what it lacks in mystery and dreamlike confusion, it more than makes up for in action and campy gore. Some of the acting is cheesy and die-hard fans seem to hold a flame for the original Mike Baldwin as Mike Pearson. If you are a Phantasm fan, then you have already seen this movie a few times. If you disagree or think I have anything wrong, feel free to point it out in the comments. If you are a fan of campy, over-the-top violent movies, you owe it to yourself to go back and watch one of the innovators of the genre do it right. If you are just a general horror fan, I would recommend this movie to you highly, as well as the entire series. If you somehow missed it, do yourself a favor and make some time to sit through the grand mythos that is Phantasm. As a horror fan, it is required watching. For everyone else, if you are a normal moviegoer who doesn't enjoy this genre and somehow made it this far, I do not recommend this movie to you. Unless you're a fan of over-the-top, ridiculous B-movie action, then you may well love it. For anyone who enjoys an over-the-top, overpowered, unstoppable to the point of almost ridiculousness, yet extremely well-acted antagonist, this is also a must. The Tall Man is quite possibly the greatest antagonist of horror movie history. Personally, this is an all-time favorite that defines itself as an innovative step forward in the arc of the Phantasm series. So if you have made it this far, thank you so much. Please hit the like and subscribe and ring the bell, as I have new reviews coming out all the time. And if you liked this, you will probably like them, and I will be back with more.